us look at what we call cell differentiation, and basically some specialized cells, especially in animals. Okay, so we want to understand the fact that we have different cells, and these cells don't actually carry out the same functions. This is to say that we have cells that are designed to perform particular functions, and that's what we're going to talk about. We'll see why this specialization is actually very important, and we'll see some of the specialized cells in animals. So we start with a scenario where a person cuts their hand and while preparing food. Immediately their body begins a response to heal the wound. Okay? Describe the role of specialized cells involved in healing the wound. That's one. 2, explain how platelets and white blood cells contribute to this process. And then 3, why is cell specialization important in ensuring quick and efficient wound healing? Okay, so these questions drive us to what we are going to basically look at. Some of the cells that we shall talk about in this presentation will include the red blood cells, will include the platelets, will include the white blood cells. So what do these cells actually do? And what is the role of these cells in relation to processes just like wound healing that we have in this particular situation? So cell differentiation is a process by which unspecialized cells become specialized to perform particular functions. Okay, so here we can relate this to a scenario where all of you are basically studying biology, but as you study biology, you will acquire specialized knowledge that can allow you to either be an environmental scientist, to be a veterinary doctor, to be a doctor, to be a nurse. All these are what we call specialization. So this is similar to what happens with cells, is that unspecialized cells are cells that are basically like other cells. They have not taken up special functions or specific functions, but they can undergo development and specialization to be able to perform those functions, just like a student being trained, and after being trained, they acquire special skills and competences to become, for example, a doctor. So this is something that is similar to that. Okay, so what happens with when the cells undergo this differentiation or specialization is that they acquire different shapes, they acquire different modifications in their size and other characteristics such that they can be able to carry out the specialized roles in the organism. What happens is that these cells, after acquiring these specialized roles, they cannot carry out other functions. Okay, so in the image we have, for example, we have 2 types of cells. Both of them are, by the way, we have 2 types of cells. Both of them are actually reproductive cells. One, we have the ovum, which is the egg, which is this, and then we have these, the male gametes that we call the sperms. These are reproductive cells. They carry out specialized functions. The sperm is basically to fertilize the ovum. Okay, so you can see that they have different structures and they perform different roles, as we shall see. So let us look at those specialized cells in animals. The first, we have the red blood cells. The red blood cells are the ones that actually carry oxygen and carbon dioxide in our bodies. These cells, you can see them here. They are actually round, but they have a shape that we call biconcave, meaning that both sides of these cells have a kind of depression on either side. Okay, that's why we call them biconcave. And the fact that they are actually biconcave, it means that there is a large surface area for these red blood cells to carry oxygen. They do not have a nucleus. That means that there is enough space for it to be able to carry oxygen. And remember, the oxygen is carried using hemoglobin, which is a protein in these cells. These red blood cells have a thin membrane. That means that the gases can easily diffuse in and out. And then they contain that hemoglobin that I've just talked about, which is basically a protein that binds with the gases, whether it is carbon dioxide or oxygen. And this binding is actually very efficient. And then we move to the sperm cells, which fertilize the female egg cell. The female egg cell can be called the ovum. And like we saw in our first image, these are basically reproductive cells. The male reproductive cell, which we are saying are the sperm cells, they have a different structure from the female gamete or reproductive cell. Okay, so what do they have? They have actually a head. The sperm cells have the head, the neck, and the tail. Okay, so the sperm cells have the head, the neck, and then you have a middle piece which has a lot of mitochondria, and then the tail. Okay, so what makes it possible that the sperm cells can actually perform their functions? One is that they have the tail, which we can term as the flagellum. This tail is for movement. That is for moving it, okay, towards the egg. And then they have what you call the mitochondria. These are cell structures responsible for producing energy. So this energy is important for the swimming of these sperm cells towards the egg. And then they also have the acrosome. The acrosome, which is this part here, this contains enzymes that can digest the layers of the egg cell. So we move to the egg cells. These ones are the female gametes, or they are the female reproductive cells. So for them, they are actually round, just like what you see in our image. They are actually round with Rapharian follicle cells around, with the nucleus, and then the cytoplasm. What are the things that make them unique? One is that they have a yolk that is rich in cytoplasm. Okay, this means that after fertilization, the zygote can actually rely on this yolk to for it to obtain nutrients or nourishment. Okay, it is also surrounded by a protective membrane that prevents multiple sperm cells to actually enter it. When fertilization happens, only that one sperm cell is allowed to penetrate. The others are prevented from penetrating because of the protective membranes around the egg cell. And then we move to the white blood cells. These ones provide defense against any infections. Of course, we have different types of white blood cells depending on their structures. But what all of them do is that they prevent the body from getting infections as a result of either bacteria or viruses or other organisms. So what they do is that they attack these organisms that we've actually called pathogens. Pathogens are those disease-causing organisms. Okay, so they attack and break them into pieces. Sometimes they produce antibodies that help in neutralizing these microorganisms. They're also capable of squeezing themselves through blood vessels such that they can reach where the problem is. And those are some of the adaptations that they have. And then we move to the platelets. These ones, if you cut yourself, or if someone cuts you, if you get an injury, blood will often come out. But the platelets help in preventing excessive bleeding from happening. So what happens is that they form what we call clots. These clots are basically plugs that prevent blood from coming out. Okay, so what do they do is that for them, they can squeeze themselves to areas where an injury has taken place, and then they can clamp themselves together, clamping together, and that irregular shape allows them to stick to one another and in a way forming a seal around the injured place. But they also contain enzymes that help in formation of these blood clots. Okay, the process of blood clotting involves a number of proteins that should be mobilized such that a clot is formed. And the platelets actually work with proteins like fibrin to make sure that the wound heals quickly. And then we have what we call ciliated cells. These ones are found in the respiratory system. The air that you breathe in sometimes contains foreign objects or foreign material, and these have to be trapped and actually moved. Okay, so the ciliated cells, when you talk about ciliated cells, means these cells have structures that are very numerous that are extending from these cells. And these structures are the ones that we call the cilia. So when you say ciliated cells, it means that cells that have cilia. The cilia are these small extensions here. Okay, so they help in removing particles that may have gained their entry into the respiratory system. They also help in moving mucus. Okay, so they can help in moving that mucus along the respiratory tract such that you can actually remove these foreign harmful materials or particles. And then we have what you call the nerve cells. When someone pinches you, you will feel that pain. That pain is because of electrical messages that we can call electrical impulses, or we can call them electrical signals that are sent to your brain so that you can interpret it as pain. So these electrical impulses are carried by nerves or by cells that we call nerve cells. Okay, we can call them nerve cells. So we can also call them neurons. Okay, so these are usually elongated cells. So they have an elongated structure that we call the axon, and these enable rapid transmission of these messages. And then they have mailing sheath, which actually insulates the electrical impulses such that it is rapid transmission of impulses. When there is insulation, it means the impulses have to skip those insulated areas, and the insulated areas are the ones that have the mailing sheath. Okay, and then they also have what we call the dendrites, which are these connections here. These connect to other nerve cells, and that means that it allows transmission of electrical impulses to other nerve cells. They're basically points where you can have different nerve cells connecting to one another. Okay, so what is the importance of this specialization? It's just like when you're working as a team, everyone should know what they ought to do. They should know what they need to do. If people are working in a team and they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, you will have disorganization. And this is exactly what happens in our bodies. When we have different cells doing different roles, it means that different cells are able to carry out their work efficiently because they are well adapted for those functions. Second is that it is possible to have a complex organism. Remember, complex organisms are those that have multiple cells. So we often call them multicellular cells. That means that they actually have different systems that allow them to carry out different functions. Now, if you have specialization, it means you have developed systems, and therefore you have a complex organism that is able to function. Okay, and then there is better resource allocation within the body. Actually, when the body is deprived of, for example, sufficient blood, for example, it means that the body will respond by making sure that the blood at least first goes to the organs that are delicate, such that organs that do not need blood all the time can at least deal without a lot of blood. So that means that if you have different specialized cells, it is possible that resources can be allocated efficiently. And then lastly, it is possible that you can have a multicellular organism because the different cells can be able to perform different functions. So coming back to our scenario where a person cut their hand, what cells will be involved in the wound healing? For example, in this case, definitely you have white blood cells. Why? The white blood cells will come and make sure that through that cut wound, you don't have germs entering to cause an infection. So the white blood cells will come. And then you'll have platelets. These ones will come and arrest the bleeding such that you don't lose a lot of blood from that cut wound. And then how will the healing happen? Is that the healing will only happen when the cells of the skin that has been cut actually multiply or regenerate such that the wound closes. So you also have skin cells coming up and dividing to make sure that that wound disappears. And sometimes you can have a scar that is being formed. So what will these cells actually do when they reach this wound or this injured part? The platelets will form clumps, which basically term as the blood clots. This blood clot will prevent the excessive bleeding. Okay. Of course, the platelets also will release enzymes that will help in creating that network that will prevent the blood flowing. Okay, and this will actually be the basis for healing the wound. Okay, and then the white blood cells basically arrest any bacteria that will try to enter this injured part. So they will engulf microorganisms through a process that we call phagocytosis. And then we come to the other point, which is that these white blood cells will also produce antibodies that will neutralize the harmful organisms. Okay, so in this wound healing process, you can see that different cells are involved in different functions, and that means that the process will actually be very efficient because we have different cells performing these functions that they have been specialized for. Okay, the white blood cells will ensure that no infection will be spreading to the other parts of the body, and you have the skin cells dividing very rapidly such that you have quick